Good evening, students, and welcome to the spinal cord anatomy, where we will be talking about the spinal cord anatomy. I apologize, I probably shouldn't have started off with that terrible, terrible accent, but here we are. You're stuck with it. So, first and foremost, let's go ahead and visit some of the more familiar stuff that's going on. Obviously, the spinal cord is made up of three different types of tissues. The first one, everyone should be familiar with in this class. It's made up of the vertebrae itself, that supporting structure, that thing that has a hole in it so that your nervous tissue can go through and be protected. It's right there. And it sneaks right on, that nervous tissue sneaks right on through that irregular shaped bone. What's another obviously evident thing is that neural tissue. Right smack dab in the middle, that spinal cord, itty bitty, kind of looking small. What probably isn't as familiar is the connective tissue and the fluid that's inside of it. Connective tissue being like a supportive, protective type of thing, with the fluid being more of also being a support, but also a little bit of a nutrient type of thing going on. If you want to hear more about these things and how to remember that, I would highly recommend going ahead and visiting Chapter 14's visit over the meninges and what's going on there. I'm going to do a very basic overview here. First off, if you have gone and done it, you will remember that the dura mater just refers to a tough mother. This is your tough mama. It's the biker mama. The heart with the arrow through it. Makes me wonder if she has mama written on that heart or if she has papa or something. I don't know. Anyways, underneath that you have the arachnoid mater. Some of you will recognize arachnoid with the term that is often used, arachnophobia. Sphere, spider, so arachnoid refers to spider-like, and the mater, so you've got a spider mother hanging out in your central nervous system. And the pia mater means gentle mother. Aww. Gentle mother being on the most inside portion, hugging that spinal cord, being gentle with it. Tough on the outside, but nice and gentle on the inside with a creepy layer on the in between. There is a liquid going through called the cerebral spinal fluid that often you will see pumping through in the middle and circulating back through, up and over through the subarachnoid space, the space in between the pia mater and that arachnoid mater. Something to note. As you are growing, your spinal cord doesn't do so well at following along with it. It tries its very best, but as you get taller, it sort of starts just shooting out nerves as it goes along. And it forms this like little horse tail. So those of you that like being always wanted to be a pony when you were a kid, congratulations, you've always been had the chance and you were a pony because you got a ponytail inside of you. There are other little details that we should just reminisce really quick. AMP1, we learned that there were cervical bones. We had with 8 pairs. This one's kind of new with 8 pairs of cervical nerves, 12 pairs of thoracic, 5 pairs of lumbar, 5 pairs of sacral with a coccygeal nerve down at the bottom. Let's go ahead and one last thing too. We're going to visit here later. Plexus. Plexus just refers to parts where the nerves shoot out and then they start interacting with one another again. They make cross bridges, and depending on what they do, they get their name, and where they're coming out of, that's where they get their name. Cervical plexus, they're coming from, well, the neck. The brachial plexus, take a stab in the dark. Brachial means arm, so most likely it has something to do, a lot to do with controlling your arm. Lumbar plexus, it's coming from the lumbar region, and the sacral plexus coming from, well, the sacral region. For now, let's look at the caudae equinae real quick. You'll notice that it starts around the L2 region. I want you to go ahead and take a quick thought. Think really, really hard how wonderful a little anatomical bit of information that is for you and me. Okay, that's enough thinking. Why that is so amazing is If we stuck a needle up here, up above in the spinal cord where it's nice and formed, a nice solid thing, it's not going to end very well if you don't have a very gentle, very precise hand. Well, down here, if you have a blunt needle and you stick it in a little too deep, most likely those nerve fibers are going to move off to the side. So that's a huge bonus. So that means the best thing to do, and unfortunately for a lot of us, after getting hit with lidocaine, we're still going to get hit with a blunt needle, which is kind of painful. You feel a little bit of pressure going on through that meninges. You have to get through that duramater. You have to get through that stuff to be able to introduce. Maybe you want to do a quick epidural, or maybe you want to do a quick spinal tap to get some medicine in. Obviously, you don't really want to do it when you have a lot of pressure or cerebral spinal fluid built up, or else you're going to get a hematoma, but I digress. You are going to aim between the L3 and L4 vertebrae. L3 and L4, you are safe to assume that it is cauda equina going on there. I keep on saying cauda equina. It's cauda equina. Your horsetail. Now, moving on, we're going back up to that solid portion of that spinal cord. There's a lot of things labeled here. Lots and lots and lots. We are not going to go over every single bits and piece of this. I'm just going to point out a few things that I think are super duper important. One thing that you will need to know and understand as a nurse and in this class is which signals go where. What's the point of this? What's the gray matter? What's the white matter? How do I know which side is the posterior side and which side is the anterior side? I'm going to pull my hair out. Never fear, Underdog is here to help you out. We've got ourselves a sensory nerve. All sensory information and input is coming in through the posterior. One major landmark to help you remember posterior is this root ganglion right here. It's a nice, thick, bulbous thing right here hanging out at the back of the spinal cord. You have cell bodies. The sensory cells have a lot of their cell bodies hanging out right here in these lumpa things. So the sensory signals are coming in, and they may, if it's a reflex, it's going to innervate with some neurons, or it can just go simply up to the central nervous system. Motor neurons, their tracks are going to descend. They're going to come through the anterior portion and out and do their thing. This is a little bit cleaner of a picture that I like to help use it. Less wording, less things to see, less complex. We've taken away that ganglion there, that massive cell bodies, because there's other things that you can use to use as a landmark to say, okay, this is the posterior, this is anterior, this is where the motor neurons go out, this is where the sensory, et cetera, come in. Posterior, remember, sensory neurons come in. This gray matter is cell bodies. This white matter is myelinated axons. So these are your neural tracts. These are tracts. Remember that there's a difference between tracts and nerves. Nerves are on the peripheral nervous system. Tracts are axon in the central nervous system. Way to help you remember the orientation of the spinal cord. One, look at this. I'm going to use some nomenclature from A&P1 when we were talking about bones. A sulcus is a small indentation. A fissure is a nice big rip, almost. That nice big rip is it is in the front. Well, that sulcus is a little bit of an indentation. Just a itty bitty line going on in the back here. You can also use the gray matter as a helpful landmark. It kind of looks like a butterfly. Go ahead and turn it upside down, turn your head upside down, whatever you got to do to look at it. The main portion, the front of the butterfly and its more generous portion of its wing are facing forward, while its butt side, its posterior side, is hanging out towards the back. So the back of the butterfly has its butt back there, while the front of the butterfly is hanging out in front. So front butterfly going anteriorly, back butterfly going posteriorly. Sensory neurons coming in from the back, motor neurons going out the front. Here are some pictures of our wonderfulness of the spinal cord throughout. You'll notice that the majority of the time the butterfly is up in front with the principal portion of its wings up in front. You do have that fissure going on in the cervical. You do have that fissure going on thoracic. You got it in the lumbar and you got it in the sacral. That's what the nerves look like in the cauda equina. So let's talk a little bit of physiology now. So I mentioned tracks, right? Right. This will also help you somewhat remember which way the sensory neurons are coming in and which way the motor neurons are coming out, anterior versus posterior. A lot of the information that goes up to the brain happens to more posteriorly. In fact, if we were to scooch forward a little bit, you will see that one side of this diagram is painted with the sensory neurons, while the other side has has only motor neurons. The motoneural tracts. These tracts, you'll notice these blue ones are sensory. The sensory ones are hanging out most posteriorly. In fact, they've completely dominated this posterior portion where the butterfly butt is. There's probably a more appropriate term for it, and I can't remember it because it's not a thorax. But you'll also notice that there is the most lateral portion, with somewhat sneaking up into the front. But you will also notice that the motor neurons have absolutely no space in the back. They have some on the lateral side, but a lot more domineering up in the front. Kind of makes sense since, most of the neurons and their axons kind of come out here, up in the front. Do you need to know gracile fasciculus or any of these nerves of these tracts? No, not really. Just know that the majority of the motor neurons are up in front, with the majority of the sensory neurons hanging out in the back and on the middle. Now here's an FYI to help really push things forward. Polio is a virus. It kind of has a little bit of a structure that looks maybe a little bit like COVID-19, but its target, rather than the respiratory system, is the motor neurons themselves. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, the president during the Great Depression, as well as the majority of World War II here in the United States of America, had polio as a kid, or had polio, I should say. And the majority of the time when you see photos of him early on in the Great Depression or early on in World War II, you'll see him standing. Polio had weakened his motor neurons. They had destroyed quite a few of his motor neurons, and he had to have support. You would see somebody standing by him, or you would see him standing with the rail. He was trying to make certain that the public knew that their president or their president-elect or this candidate for president wasn't weak, wasn't debilitated. He was trying to make himself look strong. Later on, but in his private life, he was often in the wheelchair. And later on in life, he was more stricken to that wheelchair until he died. Polio is not a fun thing to have. It is not a great thing to have. It is detrimental, and it's taken many lives. Know that the motor neurons also serve the diaphragm, the major muscle, as well as the major muscles of breathing. So if those motor neurons go, you're dead. Or you're going to have an iron lung breathing for you, or you're going to be on a ventilator. Polio is not a silly little joke just to brush aside. It has some very bad things about it. One more FYI is the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or those of you that remember the ALS challenge. This is the big disease name that is accompanied with the ALS challenge. ALS is a neurodegenerative, again targeting motor neurons. Except for there's no disease, no pathogen, no virus that's associated with it. It's just a degenerative disease that's thanks to the ALS challenge, has had funding and money and has helped progress research. So woohoo, go social media, you've done something good. But ALS is, again, targets that motor neuron. It targets and destroys, but leaves and spares the sensory neurons. So you can still feel, you can still see, hear, taste, all that good stuff. You're just left incapacitated. Stephen Hawking is one of the most brilliant physicists that you see here right now. He passed away rather recently. But he was diagnosed with it in college, and he had lasted for 40 years with it. Some people only have about a year or two with it before they pass away due to it. The way he communicated is that he moved his eyes around, and this little sensor right here that looked at him, or watched his eyes move around as he looked at a keypad, would then recognize that he's trying to say certain words, and he could write it out, and the machine would speak it out for him. With that is the end of the basic spinal cord anatomy and physiology. We'll be going on here shortly with more.